It all starts in the 2000s in an Eastern European country, where we see a trail of total destruction. A badly injured man, covered in red, is sitting on the ground, struggling to hold his weapon. He took a direct hit right in the chest and is losing a lot of red. His trembling hand keeps a firm grip on the pistol as red pools on the floor. A little girl holding a stuffed rabbit begs him not to pass on. But the man tells her to get away from there quickly. Her eyes fill with tears. Not wanting to abandon the one who tried to protect her, he changes his tone and speaks harshly, asking if she wants to meet the same end there. Frightened by his reaction, the girl finally starts to back away, crying. She keeps running with her face wet with tears, feeling the pain of having to leave him. The injured man watches the little girl flee, knowing it was the only way to save her. Suddenly, he senses a presence approaching and braces himself for the worst. Calm and steady footsteps begin to echo through the area, signaling the arrival of someone dangerous. A man in a trench coat appears, walking calmly through the ruins with his henchmen. The man with gray hair and dark glasses approaches, accompanied by armed soldiers. He looks at the injured man on the ground and calls him by his feared code name, Nightshade. The gray-haired man comments that he really was a relentless monster, just as the rumors said. He's surprised that his rival caused all that damage completely on his own. The truth is, dozens of enemy soldiers are lying motionless all around the courtyard. The man says this is unforgivable as he surveys the scene of total destruction. He laments seeing such a strong warrior choose this outcome because of a foolish attachment. The gray-haired man points his weapon directly at Nightshade's head and asks for his last words. Instead of showing fear, the injured man just gives a mocking smile to the one about to finish him. He gives a thumbs up, showing he doesn't regret anything he's done. The gray-haired man says he'll see him in the underworld and prepares to pull the trigger without mercy. The scene changes to a warehouse where a brute is yelling and threatening a kneeling young man holding a golf club. The intimidating bald man asks if they think they can just back out now. The red-haired young man desperately explains they took the job thinking it was just for driving. Another criminal mocks him, saying it's still a driver's job, and he doesn't get the complaint. The young man begs for little mercy while still kneeling before the armed men. He shouts that it makes no sense to have to go to a crime scene to pick up a hitman. Annoyed by the shouting, the brute slams his golf club on the ground to scare them. He warns them that their job is to transport anything, and that they should be quiet once and for all. The brute pulls out a very sharp knife and threatens to end the young man right there. The young man pleads for mercy, but suddenly a firm hand grabs the aggressor's arm, stopping the blow. The bald man is in shock, realizing someone had the nerve to grab his hand with so much force. It's the redhead's partner, named Kay, who smiles and offers to do the job alone. Kay asks them to let his colleague go, while the redhead stares at him in disbelief. He tries to calm his partner down, saying that hitmen don't just go around taking out anyone. Despite trying to sound confident, the young man mentally wonders if that's really true. Suddenly, in an office, we see a man being brutally taken down, leaving a red trail behind. The other men in suits in the room panic, realizing they've walked into an ambush. One of them yells for the boss to get down, but ends up getting hit in the head by a shot. The survivors are completely horrified to see their companion fall to the floor, motionless. They notice the powerful shot went right through the wall, which seems impossible. The shooter knows that a simple plaster wall would never be able to stop his powerful projectile. The sound of footsteps approaching down the hall makes the survivors in the room tremble with fear. The gray-haired hitman enters imposingly, pointing his silenced weapon. One of the men kicks a round table to try and use it as a shield against the imminent attack. The hitman watches the table fly toward him without showing any concern. hiding behind the makeshift protection. The men prepare to fight back any way they can, but the attempt at defense fails completely. When the shots pierce the shield and hit the henchman, the last survivor falls to the ground, wondering how the hitman managed to locate him so precisely. The shooter points his pistol and comments that the rotten smell of the yakus as something he hates. After finishing the job, he coldly puts away his pistol and looks around to make sure it's over. He places the hot barrel of the weapon into a bucket of ice to cool the smoking metal. The scene falls completely silent, with figures scattered across the floor of the destroyed office. Meanwhile, the young driver watches everything from behind a pillar, trying not to make a sound, but the hitman instantly notices his presence and points the weapon, making the boy surrender on the spot. Desperate, he apologizes and quickly explains that he was just hired for the transport. The hitman lowers his guard slightly upon realizing it's Dahlia, the driver who came to get him. The young man gives a very nervous, sheepish smile and confirms that he's the contact sent for the pickup. A short time later, their car is already cutting through the busy city highway under the light of the full moon. The vehicle speeds down the avenue as a tense silence fills the car. The young man grips the steering wheel tightly, very apprehensive about the intimidating presence of the passenger in the back seat. He tries to take a discreet look in the rearview mirror, but ends up meeting the hitman's serious gaze. The man asks what's wrong, and the young man quickly plays it off, saying it's nothing. The driver tries to start a conversation, commenting on the incredibly scary aura of a professional hitman. The executioner remains in complete silence, just staring at the young man with his piercing green eyes. The tense silence returns to the inside of the vehicle as the two continue on their way through the dark city. The young man decides to break the ice again by asking about what he saw. When he arrived at the building, he asks if the woman and children lying motionless on the first floor were also part of the contract. The hitman coldly replies that he eliminated them simply because they would have made noise if they started screaming. He adds that he doesn't care about extra casualties since the cleanup crew takes care of everything. The young driver lets out a nervous laugh and concludes that this man is far more ruthless than the rumors said. The hitman is intrigued to hear the term funeral flowers mentioned by the boy. He questions the young man about how he knows that code name, and the youth reveals that the boss himself told him. He explains that each of them is named after a flower, and that the group is known as the elite of the underworld. The hitman gets quite annoyed, thinking that his boss has been talking more than he should to others. The young man keeps talking and mentions that even a legendary monster like the gray-haired passenger. He points to the huge scar the man has on his face and asks if it was caused by a knife. The young man comments that this proves there are warriors strong enough to injure someone from that elite group. The professional hitman just keeps his gaze fixed, without saying a single word about his past. The driver also falls silent for a moment as the tense and quiet atmosphere reigns again. After a long pause, the man decides to tell him about a former comrade who was also part of the group. He explains that this warrior used the code name Nightshade, which signifies a poisonous flower, a deadly gift. The man describes that legendary partner as a true personification of the end itself in the underworld. But this hitman made the mistake of disobeying the organization's orders because he cared about a little girl. The gray-haired man coldly reveals that he himself was the one responsible for taking Nightshade out. Instead of being scared, the young driver lets out a mocking little smile and asks what the point of that is. Suddenly, the hitman cocks his pistol and presses it against the young man's neck, telling him to take that story with him. The boy is startled by this sudden change and demands to know what he's talking about. The executioner's finger positions itself on the trigger, ready to fire at point blank range and eliminate the young man. He praises the driver's counter-espionage skills, noting that he's no mere amateur. The hitman adds that the young man isn't showing real fear, as normal people sweat from nervousness. He says that the sweat of fear has a very distinct smell that anyone would notice, but the young driver is completely calm and doesn't have that odor, even with a pistol aimed at him. He demands that the young man reveal his true identity and where he really came from. In response, the young driver calmly starts to let go of the steering wheel with one hand. He raises his arms in a sign of surrender, keeping a mysterious little smile on his face. The professional hitman is very confused by such a calm reaction in the face of imminent danger. Suddenly, the young man slams his foot on the pedal, making the car swerve violently. The vehicle skids across the road as the tires screech loudly from the speed of the unexpected turn. Taking advantage of the distraction, the driver throws a powerful punch backward, hitting the hitman's face. The executioner's eyes widen, unable to believe the speed of the sudden counterattack. With the impact of the blow, the vehicle's door swings open, and the gray-haired man is thrown out. He rolls violently across the highway asphalt, trying to recover from the fall as quickly as possible. With great effort, he manages to stabilize himself on the ground as he slides along the pavement. Very annoyed, the young man's cap flies off, revealing his identity as the hitman stares at him in surprise. The boy leaps into the air with impressive agility, advancing directly toward his opponent. His eyes glow an intense red as he wields a small, sharp blade. The gray-haired man tries to aim his pistol, but is stunned by the extreme speed of the young man's attack. In a split second, a precise and swift cut slashes through the air toward the professional shooter. The blade strikes the top of the firearm with surgical precision, stopping the enemy's shot. He retreats, jumping back while gritting his teeth, realizing the danger of the situation. The pistol slide jams completely due to the exact impact the young man delivered to the metal. The two quickly distance themselves, landing on the empty highway as they size each other up with their gazes. The young man smiles confidently and explains that the side of that pistol is very vulnerable to impact. He scoffs, saying that these giant metal weapons look impressive, but are actually fragile. The executioner realizes with dread that the boy calculated and hit that exact spot in the blink of an eye. He tenses up, noticing he's facing an opponent with an absurdly high level of combat skill. Consumed by fury, the gray-haired man draws sharp claws from his hands and charges, screaming at the young man. The shining blades of the claws get ready to shred anything in their path. The young driver just opens his palms, keeping his guard ready to intercept the attack. The two begin to exchange extremely fast blows in a frantic confrontation in the middle of the highway. The veteran panics when he realizes the nerves in his arm have been severed during the clash. Taking advantage of the flaw in his opponent's defense, the boy masterfully dodges and prepares a counterattack. He delivers a devastating punch directly to the gray-haired man's chin, making his head whip around forcefully. The impact is so violent that the professional hitman starts to lose consciousness as he falls. Then, the young man finishes the sequence, sending his opponent straight to the ground with a crushing blow. Lying on the asphalt and bleeding, the gray-haired man realizes that those attacks caused more than just physical damage. He feels that each of the young man's blows systematically damaged his nerve points. Paralyzing effect on his body makes the veteran remember the deadly poison of the belladonna flower. The young man stands over him as a dark and terrifying aura surrounds him in the night. The gray-haired man demands to know who he is, and the young man mocks him for being slow to connect the dots. Upon hearing that specific nickname, the injured man's eyes widen in profound shock. The young man lets out a sarcastic smile, asking if he's finally figured out who is there. The gray-haired man is completely panicked, muttering to himself that this should be impossible. The young man calls him a coward and ridicules his earlier claim of having been the one to finish him. He reminds his rival that he only had the courage to show up in the past, when he was already on his last legs. The man desperately insists that he had passed on, and the young man agrees, saying that he really did. He adds with a crazed look that he somehow ended up coming back to life again. The veteran listens to this, completely stunned, unable to process what was just revealed. His claws fall to the asphalt as he repeats to himself that a resurrection would be impossible. Ignoring the enemy's despair, the young man begins to skillfully spin his weapon. His expression turns cold and determined again as he prepares to end the conversation. The gray-haired man asks if the point of all this is revenge, and the young man ponders the word. An image of the small stuffed rabbit lying on the ground appears in the legendary young warrior's mind. He reveals that there is something very important he needs to get back from those criminals. The young man declares with hatred that to achieve his goal, he will turn the entire organization to ashes. The hitman shouts in disbelief, asking how he dares to think he can destroy the entire group. The young man reflects that the number of elite assassins has increased significantly in recent times. The veteran is fatally struck in the neck, babbling that the young man won't be able to change anything on his own. The legendary Nightshade delivers the final blow, sending a spray of his adversary's red into the air. With his enemy down and out on the asphalt, the young man just turns his back and begins to walk away calmly. He coldly thinks that his rival can watch what he's about to do from a front row seat in the underworld. The scene changes to a huge meeting room, where mysterious influential figures are gathered. A blue-haired man sits imposingly next to his blonde assistant in the main hall. He reveals in an extremely serious manner that one of his top assassins has just been eliminated. The young blonde woman with green eyes hears the news, maintaining a completely cold and impassive expression. The man looks toward the young woman and asks if she remembers something very important from the past. A memory of that little girl crying in the midst of a civil war, and of her protector appears on the screen. The boss mockingly claims that he himself was the one responsible for eliminating her childhood savior. He begins to wonder if the Japanese police, or even another strong nation, could have acted against them. The man drums his fingers on the table, considering the possibility of it being a completely different enemy. He thoughtfully adjusts his light, colored hair, trying to figure out who might be behind the attack. In any case, he points out that Japan has now become their group's new territory of operation. He warns that there is a very troublesome weed growing in that region that needs to be trimmed. The boss orders the young woman to pass on the information and summon the other elite assassins for the job. The scene cuts to the blue sky of a new day, showing the beginning of a deadline they have set. We see the young man walking calmly through the crowd, as if he were just an ordinary student, but his fiery past amidst flames and explosions still echoes deep within his mind. Ever since he was very young, he had lived in the midst of the chaos and destruction of terrible battlefields. The boy never even knew his parents' faces, living isolated among the rebel. He was what people would call a war orphan, with no direction or prospect for the future, until one day, a man in a suit holding a pistol appeared before him with a dark proposal. The stranger told him to choose between ending it all right there in the gutter or becoming a strong warrior. The man offers a black pistol, extending the firearm toward the abandoned young boy. The small orphan couldn't even properly understand the meaning of such a direct and cold question. Even without fully understanding the situation, he reached out his hand and ended up choosing the path of the weapon. He was taught from a young age never to hesitate, because in the world of assassins, those who don't strike first are struck down. Exhaustive target practice was part of his daily routine to shape his skills. The instructor would yell at him to never stop moving, and to use his legs with agility during a firefight. The organization that took him in, called Garden, was much more than a simple, common syndicate of assassins. They claimed to fight for a noble cause, and said their main mission was to protect world order. The group operated covertly across the entire planet, acting in the shadows to eliminate major threats. The organization's main targets were cruel dictators who were destroying society from behind the scenes. They also pursued dangerous drug lords and high-risk international terrorists. According to the group's leaders, the secret eliminations prevented catastrophic wars from happening. The surgical strikes neutralized the targets quietly and definitively, ensuring security. The young man acted as nothing more than a perfect killing machine, carrying out this twisted justice without question. But everything started to change. He received the order to capture the daughter of a traitor to the group. From that moment on, his perfectly calculated life began to fall apart completely. The little girl he rescued looked at him, quite frightened, upon noticing how pale he was. He had been poisoned by a nerve agent for betraying the group's orders. Knowing his end was near, the poison made his hands shake uncontrollably, showing the seriousness of his situation. He handed the little girl a note, explaining that a smuggler would pick her up to save her. The young man told her to run far away from there, so she could change her identity and start a new life. He silently wondered why he was risking his life for something considered so foolish, but to his surprise, the little girl tore the paper into several pieces. Refusing to leave, she held on to his clothes tightly and declared with conviction that she wouldn't go anywhere without him. The girl stares at the protagonist with a very firm gaze and desperately asks how she can save him. He just closes his eyes with difficulty as he tries to accept that this really seems to be his end. It was the bright eyes of that little girl that deeply affected the assassin's mind. That unexpected determination broke the professional hitman out of his cold and calculating demeanor. He is seen resting in a destroyed cabin, surrounded by dozens of empty medicine vials on the floor. Those common eye drops contain only trace amounts of substances capable of neutralizing the terrible poisonous gas. Their time was extremely short, but she managed to do the impossible to try and save his life. The little girl arrives smiling with another vial, happy to see that he looks much better than before, even with several dangerous pursuers hunting them throughout the region. She didn't give up on helping him. The little girl ran without stopping, not caring at all about the risks or her own safety. She asks him to relax and rest a bit, assuring him that there are no enemies nearby at the moment. The protagonist asks if she doesn't regret throwing away her only chance to escape there alive. With a smile, she says she doesn't need it because she knows he will continue to protect her from now on. He stares at her seriously, reminding her that he is just a professional hitman and not a member of her family or a guardian. The girl makes a pouting face while he reflects that his old self would never have accepted such a situation. He places his hand on her head, thinking it would be terrible to continue living while owing a favor to a child. The protagonist makes a promise, vowing that he will protect her until she is completely safe and free. That moment definitively marked the end of his long journey in the world of hitmen. The little girl celebrates happily and shakes his hand, celebrating the first real promise he ever made in his life. Suddenly, a closed fist comes flying toward him, accompanied by a shout telling him to wake up already. The protagonist ends up taking a hard punch and is thrown out of bed, completely startled, still sleepy. He complains to Misaki, not understanding why he was woken up so brutally in the morning. The girl yells, annoyed, saying it's already past 7:30 and that he's going to be late for school. He apologizes as he realizes he is now unbelievably living as a simple, ordinary student. When the protagonist gets up, his sister suddenly stops walking and eyes him very suspiciously. She comments that he has been acting very strangely since the day he fell down the stairs and hit his head. Misaki says he came home late the previous night and adds that his clothes had a strong smell of something burnt. He gets tense, remembering he had to set a whole car on fire to not leave any trace of his job. The young woman looks at him very seriously and asks directly if he's been hanging out with dangerous people. Desperate, he tries to play it off with a forced smile, making up that he was just at a barbecue at a friend's house. The girl finds it strange because she remembers he hates vegetables, but the young man lies, saying his tastes changed after the fall. He starts giving a confusing scientific explanation about the brain to try and justify this sudden change. Misaki continues to stand still, just staring at her brother in silence with an expression that says she didn't believe any of it. Out of patience, she tells him to come downstairs quickly, because the breakfast their mom made is getting cold on the table. As soon as the door closes, he sighs in relief, noticing how observant and smart his sister is. He reflects that on the outside, his current routine as an ordinary young man seems perfectly normal and peaceful. The boy looks at a family photo frame and thinks that this whole situation still feels like a long dream. He still doesn't understand how his consciousness from 17 years ago ended up in this young student's body. With a pensive look, the protagonist reaches out and picks up the photo frame to look at the family picture up close. He realizes he didn't take the body by force, as the memories and feelings of the real Kai are still alive inside. It all started with that mysterious fall from 10 days ago. But he can't remember anything about the accident. The protagonist finds it completely nonsensical and unscientific that a blow to the head brought back his past life. Suddenly, a notification sound from his laptop gets his attention in the quiet room, puts the photo frame back on the table, knowing he needs to focus on a very important task first. The young man's expression becomes extremely serious and cold again as he walks toward the computer. The protagonist sits in front of the screen and puts on his headphones to start the secret communication. On the screen, a mysterious contact says that the data analysis is complete and that decoding it was a lot of work. He concentrates, thinking about the confidential information contained in the chip he took from Dahlia's body. A memory of the gray-haired hitman lying lifeless on the blood-soaked asphalt comes to his mind. He perfectly recalls the exact moment he searched his rival's body to take that valuable device. The hacker fiddles with a pocket watch and removes a secret chip hidden inside it. He praises the quick service and thinks it was a good idea to look up his old contacts from the past. The hacker says he was surprised to get a call from him. After he'd been missing for over 10 years, he confesses he had doubts if it was really the legendary Shade. But Dahlia's demise cleared up his suspicions. Before passing on the information, the hacker demands to know the truth behind this whole mysterious situation. He remembers that 17 years ago, he disobeyed direct orders to spare the life of a girl and her father. The man questions how he managed to survive that terrible attack that should have been his definitive end. He also wants to know why the protagonist is acting against the terrible organization again. The hacker asks a direct question, wondering if all this rebellion is because of Lilia, the girl from the past. He says that right after the protagonist's passing, the leaders of Garden took the little girl away with them. Since that day, the young woman was raised and kept under the strict rules of the powerful secret association. The hacker explains that for the past 17 years, she has been used merely as a symbol of prestige for the group. But behind the scenes, the girl lived completely trapped and had no personal freedom to do anything. He reveals that she was always treated with extreme violence and cruelty by the powerful men there. The informant concludes that his friend's only goal is to rescue that young woman from the clutches of the dangerous organization. Hearing all this, the protagonist just narrows his eyes with a very serious and thoughtful expression. A happy memory of the little girl's beautiful smile briefly flashes in the former professional hitman's mind. The hacker asks why a relentless killing machine like him would care so much. But the young man tells him to be quiet. He warns his colleague, reminding him that their main rule has always been to never investigate what isn't their business. The hacker shrugs and clicks the mouse. Agreeing to share the findings he managed to decrypt. He reveals that the chip stolen from Dahlia contained the list of the next targets, and one specific name catches his attention. The protagonist listens to the information, staying completely focused on the words revealed by his old informant. The scene changes to a prestigious all-girls school for the upper class. With students walking through the enormous courtyard, several students are chatting happily at the main gate of the school. Enjoying the beautiful sunny day, one of the young women, named Akari Shido, walks calmly while attracting the gazes of all the other girls. Some classmates say goodbye to her in a very polite and gentle manner, showing a lot of respect for the girl. Akari waves with a friendly smile and wishes them all a safe trip home very kindly. She continues on her way under the admiring gaze of her classmates, who keep watching her steps. While the students continue to whisper, a mysterious figure watches the activity from a distance. Hidden in the shadows, wearing a red jacket and a cap, the protagonist analyzes the data about the next target directly on his phone. The screen shows that the young woman is 17 years old and is the daughter of the deceased leader of a dangerous local criminal faction. The report indicates that she is the only living heir to one of the largest and most feared Yakuza mafia empires in the country. The former head of the Shido clan was known in the underworld for following an extremely strict code of honor and conduct. The protagonist realizes that this innocent girl is the person the Garden organization is planning to eliminate now. He reflects that his current identity is just a student, but his opponent is a powerful global group of assassins. The criminal organization holds enormous influence over the biggest political and business leaders on the planet. He concludes that fighting head-on against such powerful assassins, using only his own fists, would be total madness. Because of this, he decides to use this young woman's imminent danger as a starting point to put his plan into action. The protagonist's ultimate goal is to create the necessary conditions to destroy Garden and burn it to the ground. With a determined look, he promises himself that he will do everything to see that entire organization crumble. He continues to watch the girl as she walks calmly down the sidewalk, with no idea of the danger she's in. The young man puts his phone away, thinking that her father must have loved her very much to put her in such a traditional school. He lets out a mocking chuckle, imagining the difficult job her bodyguards must have protecting her every day. Suddenly, a man in a suit appears stealthily behind the protagonist and calls out to him in a very threatening way. The Yakuza security guard cracks his knuckles and warns angrily that this isn't a safe world for boys to be playing in. The brute furiously states that a kid who's never even held a real weapon would be eaten alive around here. In response, the protagonist gives a sinister smile from under his cap, his eyes glowing a threatening red. The security guard stops walking in a deserted alley and says dryly that this place is far enough. He rolls up his jacket sleeve, furious, demanding to know who the young man works for and why he's following the young Harris. The protagonist just turns around calmly and replies ironically that he wasn't exactly hunting the girl. The bodyguard raises his closed fist and warns that he doesn't need a direct answer from the young intruder. He gets into a fighting stance and shouts angrily that he's going to beat the answers out of him. His rival throws a violent punch, but the protagonist easily dodges the attack just by moving his head. Kai observes his opponent's movement and instantly recognizes his fighting style as boxing. Annoyed, the man begins to unleash a rapid sequence of blows while shouting with all his might. The security guard gets extremely frustrated upon realizing that none of his powerful punches can even scratch the boy. He tries to adjust his stance and advance once more, showing very agile and technical footwork. But the protagonist also displays perfect footwork, dodging smoothly and effortlessly. The bodyguard completely loses his patience and charges with a straight punch, yelling for the young man to stop playing around. To the aggressor's surprise, Kai simply catches fist in mid-air with a single hand and with no difficulty at all. Keeping his rival trapped, the protagonist prepares to deliver a swift blow to end the confrontation right there. With absurd speed, he lunges forward and grabs the big guy's neck, leaving his opponent in complete shock. Kai squeezes his opponent's throat firmly, demonstrating that he possesses incredibly frightening physical strength. He brutally pins the security guard to the ground, making the man gasp for air and let out a groan of pain. The boy looks coldly at his fallen rival and tells him to calm down, explaining that he's not actually his enemy. The man remains pinned, unable to move, as he glares at the protagonist with great anger and frustration. Suddenly, the young Akari appears in the alley and shouts, firmly ordering the two of them to stop the fight immediately. Upon seeing his boss, the security guard on the ground calms down a bit and calls out to her, very relieved by her arrival. The girl walks calmly toward them, maintaining her elegant posture, even in this tense situation. She says she doesn't know who the protagonist is, but authoritatively demands that he release Katajiri immediately. Kai looks back at her and lets out a sarcastic smile, thinking that this young woman indeed has a lot of courage. He agrees to let the security guard go as long as the girl is willing to hear what he has to say. The boy suggests they have some tea together, but the security guard curses at him angrily, telling him to stop messing around. Akari closes her eyes for a brief moment and seriously considers the stranger's unusual proposal. She turns her back with great elegance and simply accepts the invitation, telling both of them to follow her. The three of them walk down a quiet street and enter a narrow alley that leads to a hidden establishment. They descend the brick stairs to the entrance of a cozy bar called Savannah in the late afternoon light. Sitting at a table, Key compliments the place but comments that the simple atmosphere doesn't quite match a rich mafia girl. The security guard gets annoyed by the mockery, but Akari calms him with a gesture and asks them to get straight to the point. The young woman holds her teacup very delicately, maintaining her calm posture in front of the mysterious boy. She takes a sip and says that he certainly had a very important reason for approaching her like this. Kai reveals that she is not his target, but the target of a feared professional hitman who is after her head. The two are shocked by the revelation, and the young man asks if they didn't already have a good idea why. He says she knows she's in danger, but warns that her security guard won't be able to protect her against Chauka. Akari's eyes widen with deep fear upon hearing that feared and dangerous codename from the underworld. He explains that they are legendary hitmen, and that not even an army of Yakuza would stand a chance against them. The girl stares at him, completely perplexed and frightened, unable to understand how this boy knows such secret things. They both lean in and demand to know who he is, and what exactly he knows about this dangerous organization. The protagonist maintains a completely cold and mysterious expression, showing no emotion at their questions. He enigmatically clarifies that he is not their ally, but rather the worst enemy of their common enemies. Kay smiles and offers to eliminate the threat, provided he can stay at her mansion for a while. Katajiri slams his hand on the table in anger and shouts, telling the protagonist to shut up and stop with the demands. The protagonist gives him an extremely dark look and coldly warns him that he wouldn't do that if he were him. In that instant, an overwhelming blood emanates from the boy, leaving the two of them paralyzed with terror. The bodyguard starts to break out in a cold sweat and tremble with fear, feeling the terrifying presence of doom itself before him. Intimidated by the boy's immense power, the man sits back down, unable to say another word. Akari regains her composure and seriously questions why she should believe the boy's words. He tells her about the recent elimination of 3 of their faction's executives in Yokohama. Revealing it was Chauka's work, Katajiri panics and asks how he knows that, since that terrible incident was not reported in the media. Kei says there was a press blackout, but reveals that the victims had their heads blown apart, gunshots. Kei coldly reveals that the professional hitman who eliminated their group goes by the codename Dahlia. Katajiri breaks into a cold sweat, completely shocked by this revelation, and desperately asks how he knows that. The boy simply places Dahlia's weapon on the table. Stating coldly that he was the one who eliminated him, he calmly suggests that they use their contacts in the police to run a ballistics test on the object. He adds that the team sent to clean up the evidence was also eliminated after the confrontation. The bodyguard points to the pistol with suspicion and asks if he might be the group's real killer. Kei smiles mockingly and asks if they really think he would go to all this trouble if his target was Akari. The clan's young Harris just stares at him in absolute silence. Carefully analyzing the boy's every word, Akari stands up and announces that she has decided to believe his story, leaving her security guard completely desperate. She orders them to return to the mansion immediately and tells Katajiri to get the car without wasting any time. Though reluctant, the bodyguard accepts her orders, and shortly after, they depart for the enormous estate. Once inside the mansion, the young woman sits in her private office, while the security guard remains standing by her side. Katajiri states that he is completely against letting such a dangerous and suspicious stranger into their residence. Suddenly, Kai slides open the door and mockingly comments on the impressive size of the Yakuza mansion. He enters, analyzing the place, and asks ironically if the antique vase in the second-floor hallway is real. The girl answers calmly, but Katajiri shouts furiously, asking who gave him permission to walk around freely. Ignoring the shouts, the protagonist mentally maps out the security and notices there are few guards watching the place. He notes that the protection scheme consists of only 1 guard at the main gate and 2 teams patrolling the gardens. He concludes that besides them, there is only 1 more employee monitoring the cameras in the control room. The bodyguard is stunned and breaks into a cold sweat, unable to understand how the young man figured all that out so quickly. Kei gives a slight smile and warns that Akari's bulletproof vest is just a useless good luck charm. The young woman stares at him, surprised, noticing the impressive level of observation of this mysterious newcomer. The protagonist warns that the new enemies are not mere amateurs and says he's only telling her this for her own good. Meanwhile, in the city's dark sewers, the presence of a new threat makes the rats flee the tunnel in fear. The firm steps of high heels begin to echo on the damp floor of the underground gallery, revealing someone's approach. A mysterious woman wearing traditional attire walks calmly through the darkness, exuding a murderous energy. She carries a shining sword decorated with red flowers and wears a terrifying and merciless smile on her face. Back at the mansion, the protagonist seriously insists on his advice to send all the employees away. Katajiri yells furiously, refusing the proposal, and questions why they should abandon the mansion because of him. Kai explains that ordinary henchmen are useless against Garden, and that they will only get taken out for nothing and get in the way. The bodyguard loses control and grabs the collar of the boy's jacket, yelling that they risk their lives for real. At this, Akari intervenes firmly and orders Katajiri to let the protagonist go and do exactly as he said. She kindly asks him to obey her order, making the security guard back down, surprised but not questioning his boss. Though very reluctant, the security guard releases the boy's collar and accepts that he will have to follow the young woman's instructions. Outside, all the other Yakuza henchmen leave the premises, complaining but aware that these are the boss's orders. Back in the room, Katajiri sits on the floor and reports that he sent everyone away, just as the protagonist had instructed. Despite this, the young woman says she allowed her faithful security guard to remain by her side, wielding a sharp katana. Kai accepts the decision but comments that he is very surprised to see the girl trusts his words so much. Akari says that if legendary assassins are coming, her ordinary guards would have no chance of winning. She concludes their deal with professional assassins. The best way is to use another assassin for defense. The protagonist leans in and asks, with a sarcastic smile, what makes her think he's really an assassin. The young heiress looks at him seriously and reveals that she knows, because she has been in front of a real killer before. She explains that his look, when he knocked out Katajiri, was exactly the same as that of the terrible criminal she once knew. In the girl's memory, that ruthless and deadly expression the young man displays when focused on combat resurfaces. The look of a fierce beast, completely fixated on the prey right in front of it, without showing any hesitation. The young woman fiddles with her school uniform and thoughtfully confesses that his gaze had something different about it. Akari says the protagonist's eyes were not like the cold gaze of someone who just mechanically seeks to take lives. The young woman reveals, looking into his eyes, that she could feel a flame that burned with great intensity inside the boy. The boy falls silent at this revelation as images of his violent and hate-filled past resurface in his mind. Concludes by saying that she noticed in the young man's eyes a burning and obsessive passion to achieve a much greater goal. The girl finishes by saying it was precisely because she noticed this determination that she decided to put her trust in him. Ki listens to Akari's words very calmly, maintaining his mysterious posture, and just nods in silent agreement. The protagonist asks about this assassin from the past, and the young woman reveals that she was responsible for her father's passing. Akari sadly recounts that she personally witnessed the entire violent scene that took the life of the Shido clan leader. Intrigued, the boy asks what kind of woman this criminal was to commit such a bold act against the Yakuza. The young woman describes her rival as an elegant elderly woman who had a gentle smile, as if she were visiting an old friend. She remembers that with this friendly demeanor, the woman appeared before her father, without raising any initial suspicion, but then she committed a terrible rampage, cruelly eliminating all the security guards in the house. The elderly assassin continued to smile with complete coldness as the men screamed in desperation before their end. With precise movements, she struck all the bodyguards' necks without showing the slightest sign of hesitation. Kai interrupts her seriously and asks if, by any chance, the blade the woman used had a very specific design on it. He questions if there was an engraving of a flower, called a red spider lily on the weapon's metal. The girl is very surprised and asks suspiciously how he could possibly know such an intimate and secret detail. The protagonist becomes tense and thoughtful, confirming his suspicion that this dangerous assassin has indeed returned. He can't believe that this terrible elderly woman is still active, taking jobs in the underworld. Suddenly, the large wall clock in the room begins to chime, announcing that something strange is about to happen. Akari becomes alert, feeling a strong negative energy, and seriously states that something is very wrong in the mansion. The protagonist also notices the sudden change in atmosphere, and cautiously asks what's happening. Just then, the elderly assassin appears calmly in the hallway with her bloodied blade, asking if they are ready She leaves a trail of red behind her as Katajiri appears injured on the floor, clutching his wounded arm. The old woman mocks the local security, comparing the immense mansion to a spiderweb full of prepared traps. She comments with disdain that she easily noticed the traces of various tricks and dangers scattered throughout the house. The woman demands to know who else is hiding on the property, threatening to commit another terrible act of violence right there. Displaying her golden needles, she smiles sadistically, comparing their torment to a simple game of pulling off petals. Katajiri cries out in pain as tries to stand firm against the terrifying and cruel presence of this dangerous rival. With absurd agility, the criminal appears right behind the injured security guard. Whispering frighteningly in his ear, seeing her partner in danger, Akari charges forward furiously, wielding a sharp katana to try and stop the rival's attack. She delivers a powerful sword strike against the old woman, but the rival blocks the attack, creating a strong clash of metal. The young woman breathes heavily, realizing that the attacker easily bypassed all the house's security. Katajiri desperately shouts, begging his boss to get away from the fight immediately to ensure her safety. But the young woman remains firm on the defensive, ready to protect her ally against the deadly assaults of the terrible old woman. The elderly assassin observes the young woman's movements, preparing her golden needles for a deadly counterattack. Akari grits her teeth and maintains full focus on her opponent. Knowing that any mistake could result in tragedy, the criminal smiles like a psycho, commenting that this will save her a lot of work hunting targets around the house. She fondly recalls past jobs she has done, showing that she takes sadistic pleasure in taking others' lives. The old woman reveals that she remembers her very well when she was a frightened little girl peeking through a crack in the closet. She adds mockingly that the young woman has grown up and now has the exact same defiant look as her father. The aggressor sarcastically praises the young woman's determination and bizarrely says that her eyes look delicious. Suddenly, the elderly criminal's eyes widen in surprise as she senses someone approaching without making a sound. The young woman takes advantage of the distraction to launch another swift attack with her katana, trying to hit the dangerous aggressor. With impressive agility, the old woman dodges by leaping backward, while keeping her needles in a defensive position. Akari retreats and positions herself protectively in front of her injured security guard, facing her rival with great seriousness. At that moment, calm footsteps echo through the room, and a familiar voice sighs at the widespread confusion. Kai appears, walking calmly, and complains that the girl is not behaving like a young woman under his protection. The protagonist's eyes begin to glow an intense red, exuding a terrifying combat energy. The elderly assassin immediately repositions herself and furiously throws several needles at the newcomer. With swift movements, she lunges at him, wielding her dagger decorated with red flowers, ready to strike. Even facing the enemy's deadly assault, the protagonist remains completely calm and focused, not retreating a single step. The boy continues to walk slowly toward them, as if the aggressor poses no real threat. He takes control of the situation, placing himself in front of Akari as the rival's blade gleams in the hallway. Katajiri and Akari watch the tense approach, holding their breath in suspense. The two remain cornered on the floor, while the protagonist and the elderly assassin face each other in the middle of the hallway. The old woman realizes from Kai's positioning that the young man before her is definitely not an ordinary opponent. She remembers that practical combat techniques teach you to never take a defensive stance against someone using knives. The basic reason for this is that trying to block a blade attack with only your bare hands is impossible. Furthermore, the arms contain vital arteries, and any deep cut in this area could be fatal. Because of this, intentionally letting your guard down serves as a very intelligent survival tactic. This action is meant to lure the opponent into aiming for the neck or torso, causing them to get too close to attack. As soon as the enemy confidently advances, you intercept them by applying a devastating and decisive counterattack. The criminal reflects that knowing the theory is easy, but putting it into practice during actual combat is another story. She looks at the young man who remains standing before her, looking completely vulnerable and with no active defense. The old woman senses the trap, but in the next instant, the protagonist's cap falls off, fully revealing his face. The woman's eyes widen in complete horror as she realizes the boy has already initiated his surprise attack. With absurd speed, the young man delivers a low kick upwards, trying to hit his opponent's chin. The assassin manages to react quickly and performs an agile leap backward to escape his deadly blow. The two begin to trade swift attacks, moving like blurs in the middle of the mansion's dark hallway. Kay smiles confidently and comments that he really thought he could catch her by surprise with that kick. The woman smiles back and praises his audacity, finding it incredible that a boy took the initiative in the attack. But then she becomes intrigued and asks if the blow he delivered was specifically aimed at her fibular nerve. She thoughtfully comments that it has been a long time since she last faced a true practitioner of silent. This vital point, located on the side of the leg above the knee, can paralyze movement with a strong kick. The protagonist smiles and praises the old woman's perception, admitting that she knows fighting techniques very well. But the boy's combat style and audacity remind the woman of a very unpleasant warrior from long ago. At this, the elderly assassin recalls her time as a combat instructor at Garden more than 20 years ago. She remembers the intense training sessions. She taught deadly blade techniques to the group's young prospects. The woman explained that the technique didn't depend on brute force, but on creating a natural flow. In the midst of combat, she instructed the young shade to let the blade glide smoothly. Following the rival's movement, the little prodigy listened in silence, his red eyes glowing intensely in the darkness of the room. The instructor complained that words didn't seem to affect him, and challenged him to fight a little more. With absurd reflexes, the young boy dodged and blocked all of the teacher's attacks impressively. He could easily intercept her weapon, and mockingly claimed that he had already understood the secret. Then, with a terrifying smile, the boy asked the old woman to teach him the next combat technique right away. She realized she was facing a true monster, capable of mastering her techniques just by watching them once. Humiliated by his talent, she resigned from her position as an instructor the next day, returning to active duty as an elite assassin. The old woman felt she needed to hone her skills in real combat, so she would never be surpassed like that again. Her only goal was to perfect her fighting technique and achieve absolute perfection in her deadly dance. Back in the present, the woman's eyes are filled with fury as she realizes who the young man standing before her is. She leaps toward the protagonist, delivering a violent attack to try and eliminate him once and for all. The boy calmly dodges and comments with complete coldness that he actually never really hated her. He recalls the old teaching to destroy the opponent's will to fight before piercing their heart. The elderly assassin freezes in complete despair, realizing that this secret advice was something only she knew. Kay moves with absurd speed, leaving a trail of red energy as he prepares his counterattack. He calmly repeats his words, making it clear that he indeed never held any kind of grudge against her. The elderly criminal is completely paralyzed and sweating with terror, unable to believe what she is witnessing. The protagonist smiles and praises that valuable lesson from the past that ended up shaping his way of fighting and surviving. She stares at him with wide, fearful eyes, finally understanding the young man's true identity. The woman stammers in shock that this would be completely impossible in the real world of the living. Without giving her time to react, The protagonist charges toward her like a lightning bolt, exuding an overwhelming force. The two clash forces again in a quick confrontation where Kei easily dodges and nullifies his rival's assault. The boy blocks his opponent's arm with precision and delivers a direct hit right to the dangerous aggressor's chest. The bodyguard and Akari watch the confrontation, completely shocked and apprehensive about what's about to happen. The dagger with the flower design slips from the old woman's hand, falling toward the mansion's wooden floor. However, the woman quickly regains control of her weapon as drops of red fly through the air. The dangerous assassin is grazed by the attack and quickly retreats away from her opponent. Protagonist's expression remains completely cold, even with a small cut bleeding on his neck. Consumed by fury, the old woman screams with all her might and charges again with extreme aggression. She unleashes a series of rapid dagger strikes, but the boy dodges each one with great agility. Kai smirks and comments that the terrible ability known as the ivy is still as sharp as ever. This technique consists of extreme flexibility in the joints, allowing for unnatural movements. The ivy is like Chorus's trademark, allowing her to launch attacks from completely unexpected angles. She twists her wrist in a bizarre way to deliver a new attack with the dagger stamped with a red flower. The old woman is surprised to find he knows this secret and asks directly if the boy is really Nightshade. The protagonist lets out a sarcastic little smile and boldly replies by asking what she'll do if he is. Lycoris remains silent for a moment, finding the situation incredibly bizarre and confusing to accept. She mentally questions how an ordinary young student could carry the consciousness of her former colleague. Despite her logical doubts, her assassin's instincts begin to scream that he is indeed that monster. The image of the legendary warrior surrounded by an aura of doom appears in the old woman's mind. Confirming her greatest fears, she smiles maliciously, realizing that she has finally found the terrible opponent she has been looking for so long. The criminal prepares to attack, moving incredibly fast and beautifully through the property's hallway. Red petals seem to float around her as she advances like a true deadly whirlwind of blades. The old woman screams with a manic look, telling him to witness her famous and deadly dance on the battlefield. A storm of swift cuts rips through the air around the protagonist, threatening to slice through anything there. She executes the dance of death, her most powerful and dangerous move. To try and end the combat quickly, Akari and Katajiri watch in absolute shock, unable to comprehend the insane speed of those attacks. The protagonist focuses his attention on the fight, knowing that the only real danger of that technique is the tip of the dagger. With fantastic agility, he begins to deliver precise punches to deflect the trajectory of his opponent's blade. His allies watch, perplexed, realizing that the young man is managing to block that barrage of blows with his fists. The young heiress of the Shido clan follows the confrontation with great concern, knowing the situation is still dangerous. Despite blocking most of them, the protagonist ends up suffering several small graze, cuts that begin to bleed. He grits his teeth in annoyance, thinking that if he were in his old body, he would never have allowed his opponent to touch him. Suddenly, Ki realizes the real danger of those attacks, and his eyes widen with a terrible discovery. He remembers that red spider lilies are poisonous, and notices that his rival's blade is coated with the substance. The old woman smiles sadistically and says he doesn't need to worry, as the poison only causes muscle paralysis. She pictures the red flower in her mind, knowing that paralyzing her opponent will make her victory much easier. Shouting with fury, she declares that she will be the one to finally cut the thread of that feared warrior's life once and for all. The boy lets out a groan of pain, feeling his movements starting to stiffen because of the poison. The elderly assassin perceives his exact moment of weakness and prepares to deliver her final, decisive attack. She completely breaks from the dance of death and gathers all her strength to focus on a single, crushing move. This final blow is designed to finish any opponent flawlessly, concentrating all of the rival's destructive power. A huge wave of cutting energy rushes toward the protagonist, threatening to mercilessly end him. Certain that she has achieved victory, the old woman screams with a manic look, celebrating her rival's end. But in a split second, the young student moves quickly, narrowly escaping the fatal attack. The old woman is in absolute shock to see that she missed her most powerful attack. In a completely inexplicable way, to her horror, the protagonist suddenly appears right behind her, whispering in her blind spot. A sinister shadow with glowing red eyes appears right behind the elderly woman on the floor. At that moment, the protagonist rushes forward and grabs the enemy's neck with extreme force. Kai pins her to the wooden floor, demonstrating overwhelming physical superiority. The assassin starts to cough up red and cries out in pain, feeling the crushing pressure on her throat. Suddenly, the criminal's weapon slips from her hand and starts to spin rapidly in the air. With absurd reflexes, the young man extends his hand and catches the red dagger with extreme precision. Without any hesitation, he delivers a precise blow to the woman's chest, making red spray out. The old woman's eyes widen in complete shock as she realizes she has been so definitively overcome. She struggles to breathe as red trickles from her mouth. Under the boy's grip, the protagonist looks down at her and coldly comments that she still wasn't strong enough to reach him. Key warns with a determined look that the two of them will face each other again when they're in the underworld. Even on the verge of her end, the old woman lets out a sarcastic smile and says she'll wait for him on the bank of the Sanzu River. Her life finally fades as red petals begin to float around her lifeless body. The two allies watch the entire scene in complete silence, extremely shocked by the outcome. Kei takes a step forward, leaving red footprints on the floor as he tries to regain his strength. The young man lets out a long sigh of relief. Trying to calm his heart rate after the battle, Katajiri approaches, very concerned, and asks if the protagonist was hit by the poison. He turns around, his face sweaty, and admits that he's not okay, but managed to slow down the toxin's effect. This tactical breathing technique is used by special forces to maintain calm under pressure. Thanks to this control, he manages to slow his blood flow, while the bodyguard suggests a doctor. The boy refuses the help and puts his cap back on, explaining that every poison user carries the antidote. He begins to search the old woman's body, leaving the security guard confused about what he just found. Kei displays a golden pocket watch with a serious look, revealing that he has just found an important clue. He focuses his attention on the mysterious object, believing it could reveal valuable secrets. The young heiress becomes thoughtful, trying to understand who really wants her gone, and for what reasons. The scene changes to the silent facade of the enormous property. Under the dim light of the cold night, Katajiri wears an extremely serious and tense expression as he thinks about the group's next steps. An open first aid kit on the floor shows that they are preparing to treat the injured. The young heiress patiently kneels to carefully bandage her faithful protector's arms. She finishes applying the bandage to his arm and softly comments that the dressing should be enough. The bodyguard lowers his head, very frustrated, and asks the young woman to give up on all this danger. He remembers the insane speed of the earlier combat and mentally acknowledges that the young man is not an ordinary human. The man realizes that the protagonist's strength level is in a completely different dimension. He grits his teeth, feeling immense frustration for not having the power needed to win that fight. Katajiri clenches his own injured fist, knowing he is too weak to protect his boss. The girl looks at him with a serene and understanding gaze, noticing her loyal protector's deep anguish. The bodyguard explains that the heiress shouldn't get involved with monsters and decides to handle the problem himself. He begs her to run far away and stay hidden in a safe place until everything is over. She reflects that running away might be a viable option. While the protagonist discreetly observes the conversation, Katajiri is startled when he notices Kei's sudden presence and demands to know when he entered the room. The two exchange deep, silent glances in the middle of the room, trying to decipher each other's intentions. The young man stares at her intently and points out that she is definitely not a simple, innocent high school student. A memory from the past shows the marks and scars of red brutally carved onto her back. He explains that the clan's violent destiny is engraved on her body, as if it were a terrible curse. The security guard stands up enraged and shouts, telling the protagonist to stop acting like he knows everything, unfazed. Kai holds up a laptop and calmly reveals that he has just discovered the name of the mastermind. Both the Harris and the bodyguard's eyes widen, completely surprised by the revelation. He explains that he had the data from the pocket watch analyzed to find out who sent the clan's assassins. The boy adjusts his cap with a mysterious smile and mockingly asks if they don't want to know the name. The security guard on his knees loses his patience and demands that the young man stop being mysterious and reveal the truth. Kai displays a photo of Messiah Kuroki, revealing that he is an important assistant leader in the Shido Mafia itself. A security guard is completely panicked upon discovering the identity of the terrible traitor behind the attack. Akari explains that this man rose through the ranks very quickly after being personally taken in by her late father. She reveals that the criminal is extremely skilled at managing all types of the clan's illegal businesses. The traitor gained a lot of financial power by running underground casinos and clandestine fighting arenas. Although considered an outsider, he was already slated to become the group's top executive. Kai analyzes the situation and concludes that Kuroki wasn't satisfied with just waiting for his natural rise. He reveals that the professional assassins hired for the mission belonged to an organization called Garden. The traitor made a secret alliance with the elite group to eliminate the old boss and the veterans loyal to the clan. His sordid plan included the total elimination of any heir to ensure complete control over the mafia. Kuroki intended to unify the entire country's underworld, using his accumulated power and the support of these dangerous killers. His entire plan depended on remaining hidden under the strong protection of the powerful and influential Garden organization. With his eyes glowing intensely, Kai declares that his true objective is to annihilate this criminal association. The protagonist turns to the Harris and directly asks what she plans to do now. He coldly questions if her only reaction to the imminent danger will be to keep running forever. The young woman kneels, displaying an extremely elegant posture and maintaining a pensive expression in the room. She looks out at the dark night through the mansion window and completely dismisses the possibility of a cowardly escape. Katajiri panics and shouts, trying to convince his boss that this choice is extremely dangerous. The young woman thanks her faithful bodyguard for his loyalty, but makes it clear that she needs to face her destiny head on. She points out that running away, without even discovering the identity of the one who took her father's life, would be a great humiliation. The young woman proudly declares that making such a pathetic choice would never be accepted in the Shido clan. Kai gives a slight, satisfied smile, realizing that the Harris has finally made her big decision. Akari states very firmly that she never once thought about running away and abandoning her responsibilities. She confesses that the immense wealth she inherited from her father was built through completely illicit means. The Harris says she accepts paying for her mistakes in the future, but refuses to hand over the family legacy to a traitor. The protagonist just watches her in silence, maintaining his enigmatic expression in the face of her strong declaration. The girl comments that she still doesn't know his real name, and the young man calmly asks to be called Ki. He mysteriously explains that it's much better for both of their safety if she doesn't know any extra details. The Harris extends her hand, deciding to officially hire him as the force needed to combat the rival Kuroki. She says that the payment for his service will be the total destruction of the feared organization he so desires to annihilate. The young woman guarantees that she will put her family's immense influence at his disposal in this difficult battle. The protagonist shows a faint smile, realizing he has just found the ideal partner for his bold plan. The Mutual Cooperation Alliance promises to give the boy access to all the strategic resources of the Shido Mafia. This includes the vast clandestine information network. The family has spread throughout the country's underworld. In addition, the boy will also have at his disposal a strong influence in the local political and business spheres. Kai knows there is no better support on the entire planet to help him crush his worst opponents. With a firm handshake, the final agreement is sealed, beginning the journey to destroy the terrible garden. The scene changes to the nighttime cityscape of the large, illuminated metropolis as danger begins to stir. In his office, the traitor Kuroki drinks wine, annoyed at not hearing from the elderly assassin he sent. He turns to his partner leaning relaxedly against the wall and asks what he thinks about the lack of contact. The identity of the organization's new hitman is revealed by the enigmatic codename Campanula. The young blonde man with bright blue eyes listens to the traitor's questions with a cold and distant look. Kuroki holds his glass and insists on the question, wanting to know if his partner really hasn't heard any news. The new assassin casually shrugs and said that looking after the old woman is not part of his job. The traitor agrees and comments that the old woman must have been proud to receive a simple elimination mission. Suddenly, a strong tremor makes the room vibrate, catching the attention of the dangerous and mysterious hooded young man. Kuroki loses control and shouts in anger, fearing that the elderly ally was eliminated just like Dahlia was. He begins to question the true power of the strongest assassins, pointing out that they just seem to be bluffing. The traitor yells furiously, saying it's all just empty talk, but is interrupted by a curt warning. In the blink of an eye, Campanula appears right in front of Kuroki, pressing a shining blade to his throat. The mafioso breaks into a cold sweat, unable to understand when the assassin got so close to his neck. Campanula glares at him threateningly and warns him to never confuse their temporary help with submission. The traitor quickly apologizes, trembling with terror as he realizes the organization's killers are not pawns. The hooded boy removes the blade, leaving only a slight, bloody cut as a warning to the mafioso. With complete coldness, the young assassin walks away, leaving the traitorous leader alone in the room to recover from the scare. Campanula continues on his way, keeping his head down under his hood and acting with total indifference to the tension. Kuroki wipes the red from his neck, trying to calm down, and concludes that the Harris's life won't change his plans. He knows that all the old executives loyal to the former boss, who could have stood in his way, are already gone. The mafioso celebrates victoriously, claiming the entire Shido Empire now belongs to him to unify the whole underworld. Campanula smiles sadistically, silently affirming that everything he does is solely in the name of the Garden organization. 2 days pass quickly as the dark night covers the luxurious commercial buildings of the big city. The lavish underground casino controlled by the traitorous clan is in full swing, with clients betting high at the tables. The roulette wheel spins intensely as professional gamblers try their luck with valuable cards at the gaming tables. Wealthy businessmen have fun in the bustling hall, splurging money and doubling their bets. Without any hesitation, suddenly, the doors open, and elegant footsteps draw the attention of everyone present at the main entrance. Akari appears stunning in a beautiful white evening gown, accompanied by the impeccably dressed Ki and Katagiri. The protagonist walks just behind, observing the extremely elegant and firm posture of his protectee in the hall. Kai focuses his attention on the doors of the exclusive area, thinking that the show against the traitor is finally about to begin. With his red eyes glowing, he promises to initiate the great counter attack against the organization from within the castle. Meanwhile, preparations for the great final confrontation continue to be made in total secrecy by the allies. The slot machines flash non-stop in the noisy hall, keeping the focus of the gamblers trying their luck. The croupier deals the cards quickly, organizing the tables for the high-stakes games taking place that night. Greedy faces and loud laughter fill the festive atmosphere of the place, which hides the dark secrets of the underworld. The trio continues to walk imposingly across the red carpet, attracting the attention of all the gamblers there. The clients begin to whisper, surprised to see such a beautiful and elegant young woman in that environment. Some start to think she's too young to be there and try to remember where they know the girl's face from. Quite tense. The security guard whispers to the protagonist, complaining that they are drawing too much attention in the hall. Key just gives a slight, completely calm smile, stating that everything is going exactly as he had planned. The scene flashes back in time, showing the wooden sign of the Shido clan. During an important private conversation, the three allies are gathered around a low coffee table to discuss the group's action strategy. Katajiri slams his hand on the table, enraged, and asks if the protagonist has completely lost his mind with that crazy idea. He demands to know why they are putting the young heiress in so much danger by sending her straight into enemy territory. The bodyguard shouts furiously, saying that if the plan was just to eliminate Kuroki, the boy should have gone completely alone. Nay coldly questions him about what would happen to the entire structure of the Shido clan after the rival's solitary fall. The boy explains that without leadership, the clan would fall into an internal war for succession and be destroyed by other mafias. Understanding the terrible danger of the group's dissolution, Katajiri grits his teeth in frustrated silence. The protagonist proposes a different scenario, where the heiress confronts the traitor personally and takes leadership of the clan. He guarantees that this courageous act will make it clear to all members who the true and only legal successor is. With that, if she takes the position of the group's boss, all the remaining men of the Shido clan will follow her without question. Akari decides to follow his advice and orders the security guard to immediately call a traditional tailor in the city. She says she urgently needs a beautiful, custom-made dress worthy of the most important night of her entire life. The protagonist just smiles, satisfied to see that the young heiress has accepted the challenge to act courageously. Back in the present, in the luxurious VIP lounge, one of the henchmen approaches Kuroki to whisper some urgent news. The traitorous leader is surprised and asks if the clan's heiress really had the audacity to show up at his casino. The informant confirms her presence with 2 security guards, leaving the mafioso furious to learn that she is still alive. Campanula fiddles with his phone with a sadistic smile and asks if he should go down immediately to eliminate the girl. Kuroki refuses the offer, explaining that committing a hit in front of the clients would destroy the place's reputation. He orders the henchman to treat the young heiress as a regular client. Without giving her any special attention, the subordinate accepts the instruction and quickly leaves to ensure everything goes smoothly in the hall. Outside, Kajiri whispers mockingly, noting that the cowardly traitor doesn't have the courage to come and greet them face to face. Kai explains that the first strategic step of the plan is to force the traitor out of his VIP headshot. The young heiress agrees with a very firm nod, showing she is ready to act. She moves forward with elegant steps in the hall, declaring ironically that she intends to have a little fun at the place. Akari walks decisively toward the main table, while her 2 protectors follow her closely. The croupier greets her with a very polite bow, not imagining the real danger that young woman represents. He kindly informs her that the minimum bet allowed at that exclusive table is 1 million yen. Without a word, Ki lifts a heavy metal briefcase, to prove they have more than enough resources. A huge mountain of high-value chips is placed imposingly on the blue felt table. The heiress mockingly comments that she doesn't mind, as she hates making small, boring bets in games. The croupier apologizes humbly and prepares to start the game under the watchful eyes of the allies. The employee begins to shuffle the cards quickly with mechanical and very precise movements. He deals the first card on the table, wishing the young woman good luck in a very professional manner. 1 hour passes quickly, and the surrounding crowd begins to whisper, astonished at the turn the game has taken. In front of Akari stands an absurd amount of valuable chips, leaving everyone in the room in total shock. The croupier breaks into a cold sweat and tremblingly announces the end of betting, realizing the situation is getting out of his control. The girl maintains a completely icy and unshakable expression as she focuses her attention on the table's felt. The casino employee starts to have a lot of trouble breathing. Overcome by an overwhelming sense of despair, his hand shakes uncontrollably. As he struggles to draw the next card from the deck, the man panics completely. Feeling the crushing pressure of imminent defeat in front of the entire audience, his trembling fingers can barely hold the card. Showing the extent of his extreme nervousness, he reveals the final card of the game, desperately hoping to reverse the terrible loss. But the final result is catastrophic for the house, confirming another crushing defeat for the croupier. The clients shout and celebrate in disbelief, unable to understand how she won so many rounds in a row. Kai just observes the commotion in the hall with a very discreet and victorious slight smile on his face. He knows that the game of blackjack doesn't depend on luck, as long as the player uses the card counting technique. The classic method consists of calculating probabilities by assigning numerical values to groups of cards. This famous calculation strategy has been used by brilliant minds to win fortunes in major casinos. However, the mental ability the protagonist displays at that moment easily surpasses any legend. Kai can instantly memorize every single card that comes out of the deck without making any mistakes. The young man recalculates the probabilities in record time, uses the reflection on his watch to chart the best course. The protagonist transmits the secret answers to Akari using imperceptible light signals on the display. For someone who has monitored routes and went on battlefields, counting 300 cards is just a simple task. This absurd mental process is a skill that only the legendary Nightshade could perform in front of the completely devastated croupier. The girl remains seated calmly and victoriously in her chair. She ironically asks the employee to deal the next card, claiming she still wants to have fun. The man's eyes widen with deep despair. Not knowing how to react to her audacious request, he knows that if he keeps losing like this, the mafia leaders will demand his life as severe punishment. Suddenly, the crowd parts, and the clients begin to murmur fearfully. Noticing who is arriving, Akari calmly turns toward the newcomer, showing that she was already waiting for this moment. Kuroki appears, walking imposingly through the hall, claiming he would have prepared a big party for her. He wears a cynical and friendly smile, accompanied by several heavily armed casino security guards. Kaktajiri grits his teeth furiously at the phoniness and angrily demands that the traitor stop the act. The traitor ignores the security guard and focuses his cold gaze on the huge mountain of chips accumulated by the heiress. He pretends to celebrate the young woman's success and politely asks her to end her betting for the night. Kuroki reaches into his jacket and pulls out a huge wad of cash to offer as a gift to the girl. The man mockingly extends the yen, suggesting she use that amount to pay for her friend's dinner. Akari looks at him with total contempt and comments that the rat who invaded her father's castle has gotten quite fat. She curtly informs him that she knows about the support from the florists of garden, revealing that his time as king is over. Upon hearing the mention of the secret code name, the traitor's expression instantly changes, becoming dark and furious. The clients around are confused by the term, but admit with shock that this Shido girl has nerves of steel. Kuroki glares at her threateningly and coldly warns that she shouldn't play with fire if she wants to stay alive. Akari rises elegantly from the table and ironically agrees with her dangerous adversary's warning. The young woman disdainfully confesses that she was already quite bored with the simple and monotonous card game. She decides she wants to personally experience the most famous and dangerous attraction his casino has to offer. The traitorous leader watches her in complete silence, trying to guess the girl's true intentions. Kuroki narrows his eyes and realizes with surprise that her real goal is to enter the terrible underground ring. This attraction is a clandestine, no-rules fighting cage hidden in the basement of the large casino. The young woman proposes that they each put a warrior in the fight, where only the last survivor will be the winner. The traitor tries to change the subject, saying there are no fights today, but is interrupted by her bold proposal. Akari declares that she will bet absolutely everything she inherited from her father, including the mansion and her own freedom. In return, she demands that the mafioso bet total control of the entire luxurious casino on that single deadly match. Kuroki starts to sweat nervously as the clients around realize that this fight will decide the clan's new boss. The crowd goes wild, excitedly commenting that this will be the most epic and insane confrontation in years. The mafioso knows that if he refuses the challenge, his reputation and authority in the underworld will be completely destroyed. The young Harris displays a victorious smile and mockingly asks if he's scared and plans to run away. Kuroki completely loses control of his emotions, gritting his teeth with so much anger at the provocation. Trying to hide his hatred, he states in a dry and forced tone that the bet sounds very fun. The mafioso officially accepts the challenge, calling the girl a brat with a look filled with pure hatred. The Harris maintains her cold and confident expression while Kay just watches everything in silence right behind her. The protagonist shows a discreet smile, thinking that everything is going exactly as they had planned. The scene focuses again on the luxurious doors of the exclusive area, where the place's secrets are closely monitored. In the control room, Campanula comfortably watches all the casino's movements on the screens. The young assassin focuses the security cameras directly on the tense conversation happening in the middle of the main hall. He carefully analyzes the protagonist's calm expression, noticing that there is something unusual about that boy. Campanula breaks into a sadistic smile and celebrates excitedly. Noting that things are about to get interesting, the scene changes to the hallway guarded by men in suits who protect the forbidden access to the feared fighting cage. The security guards in dark glasses maintain a serious posture, watching the entrance of the elevator that descends to the basement. A dark and mysterious tunnel opens up, revealing the immense and noisy underground arena that awaits the fighters. The frenzied crowd screams and cheers loudly in the stands, eager for the start of the special combat. The bright blue spotlights turn on, illuminating the entire extent of the concrete ring surrounded by bars. The official announcer welcomes the audience, announcing the start of another violent edition in the red cage. He explains into the microphone that although no fights were scheduled, a last-minute match was arranged for the night. The announcer reveals that those present are lucky to witness a completely unexpected and special contest. The man in the center of the ring announces with great energy that the first competitor is already positioned in the red corner. He introduces the current undefeated champion of the tournament, known in the underworld by the feared nickname, the Crusher. The announcer gestures excitedly to the crowd and prepares to announce the mysterious challenger from the blue corner. Key maintains a completely calm and cold expression, showing no sign of nervousness in the face of the shouts. The announcer says that the challenger has no record and will fight under the enigmatic codename Fighter K. The audience begins to laugh loudly, mocking the protagonist's thin appearance and doubting he'll last a minute in the fight, Katajiri seriously warns that the undefeated champion is an extremely violent and dangerous karate master in the ring. He alerts them that all of his previous opponents ended up seriously injured and asks if the boy can win. The security guard shows great concern, knowing that the opponent's physical strength surpasses anything they've ever seen. Kai just closes his eyes calmly and replies quietly, stating that he doesn't really consider himself a fighter. The referee enters the ring, reminding them of the basic rules. Only the use of any type of weapon is prohibited. The muscular giant shows a sadistic smile, while the protagonist gets into position, maintaining full focus on the battle. The official announcer raises his arms and shouts into the microphone, giving the signal to start the decisive confrontation. Without wasting time, the enormous champion unleashes a monstrous punch that rushes toward the young man at extreme speed. The two combatants stare intently at each other for a split second before the terrible impact of the giant's blow. The announcer yells with all his might, commanding the start of the violent and highly anticipated contest. The opponent's crushing fist advances quickly, cutting through the air to try and knock out the protagonist. Right at the start, the brute keeps throwing brutal punches while mocking the young man in the suit, demanding that he react to the attack. Kinju continues to attack violently, yelling in frustration as he sees his opponent only defending against the blows. The crazed crowd starts to shout, calling for the current champion to crush and finish off his adversary. The two continue to exchange rapid movements in the center of the ring. While the audience watches in total ecstasy, Kuroki watches the contest calmly from the VIP box, while lighting a cigarette and talking to the clan's Harris. The trader analyzes the combat and notices with surprise that the young man is perfectly dodging the focus of all the punches. With surgical precision, K blocks and nullifies each violent assault without showing any difficulty. Kuroki realizes with astonishment that the boy hasn't moved a single centimeter from his initial position since the beginning. He gives a mocking laugh and comments to Akari that it just seems like a cheap parlor trick for entertainment. The mafioso looks at her from the corner of his eye with the cigarette in his mouth and begins to explain his twisted view on real fights. He claims that traditional martial arts are completely useless in the brutal contests that take place in the underworld. Kinju continues to attack with fury, trying to use all his immense physical strength to break the boy's defense. The trader seriously states that in a place with no rules, the winner is decided by pure violence alone. The young woman completely rejects his advance, showing she is not the least bit intimidated by the rival's words. Kuroki whispers that he plans to teach her a severe lesson as soon as the fight in the ring is over. The mafioso displays a sadistic and disgusting smile, maliciously stating that every pet needs boundaries. He starts to laugh cynically while Akari remains motionless, staring at the arena with total coldness and contempt. She replies that it's a joke for him to try to control her, since he's nothing more than Garden's simple trained dog. The young Harris looks at him with absolute disgust and firmly declares that his phoniness makes her feel completely sick. Kuroki angrily puts out his cigarette in the ashtray, realizing he can't intimidate the girl with his threats. The mafioso stands up annoyed and yells at his fighter in the ring to stop stalling and just finish the boy. But in the next instant, the trader's eyes widen in profound shock as he looks at the ring. The enormous undefeated champion appears completely exhausted and panting. Not understanding how he got so worn out, Ki displays a completely relaxed and confident slight smile, adjusting his suit with extreme tranquility. Katajiri is very surprised to note that although the giant attacked the entire time, he is the one who is exhausted. The boy calmly taunts his opponent, asking if he can't even lift a single finger anymore. With impressive agility, Ki delivers a devastating spinning kick directly to the champion's head. The violent impact completely destabilizes the muscular giant, who begins to collapse onto the concrete floor. Kinju falls completely unconscious in the center of the ring. Marking the surprising end of the great contest, the bettors in the audience are completely perplexed and speechless as they witness the fall of their champion. While the referee begins the official count, the bodyguard asks in disbelief what the young man just did. Kai calmly explains that to defeat a wild beast, the first necessary step is to break its fangs. Suddenly, the two partners stop their conversation as they realize something strange is happening on the floor. The referee, who was counting, appears lifeless on the arena floor, foaming at the mouth in a bizarre way. The allies look around on high alert, realizing that a new threat has just revealed itself in the hall. Campanula appears, walking calmly through the crowd of bettors who begin to collapse coldly to the floor. The audience panics, not understanding why so many people are suddenly fainting around them. Several men start to sweat nervously, trying to figure out what is actually happening in the large casino. A trail of dark smoke follows the dangerous hooded young man's steps, knocking down everyone in his path. The assassin delivers a swift kick, easily taking out the last security guard who tried to stand in his way. Campanula remains with his back turned, displaying a terrifying aura, surrounded by dozens of unconscious people on the floor. In a few seconds, almost the entire underground audience is neutralized, leaving only the main fighters standing. Ki focuses his attention on the intruder, ironically commenting that the casino really doesn't treat its guests very well. The boy glares at him very seriously, demanding to know who he is and what exactly he thinks he's doing there. Campanula smiles sadistically, explaining that he just knocked them out to close the curtains on this grand stage. He rests his foot on the ring's railing with complete nonchalance, preparing to enter the combat cage. The rival warns that he cannot allow impromptu actors to ruin the perfectly planned script they have. The protagonist looks at him with suspicion, mentally repeating the mysterious word spoken by the intruder. Campanula explains that if their group had won that bet, all of Garden's hard work would have been wasted. The blue-hooded assassin positions himself inside the ring, ready to start a new and terrible mortal combat against Ki. Campanula decides to act as if that fight never happened and asks if Kuroki agrees. Kuroki gives a very nervous smile and agrees, saying he'll leave everything in the young assassin's hands. Campanula apologizes ironically before lunging at his opponent with great speed. A devastating kick flashes in the assassin's mind, illustrating the boy's great combat expertise. Campanula analyzes that the blow was to the carotid artery, while Kay just watches him very seriously. The intruder asks directly if the young man uses the Silat style and wants to know which branch it is. Silat is a very dangerous traditional martial art that originated in the Southeast Asia region. Because of its lethal effectiveness, the technique was adopted by special forces in various countries. There are hundreds of variations of this art, ranging from unarmed combat to the use of sharp blades. Other styles focus on the use of knives and very painful joint locking techniques. The protagonist's red eyes glow intensely as he prepares for the new fight. Kai moves at extremely high speed, leaving trails of light and dust throughout the combat arena. Suddenly, the assassin advances quickly and tries to grab Kai's collar to immobilize him. Campanula assumes an intimidating combat stance while releasing a dense purple aura around him. The protagonist is pushed back forcefully, but manages to maintain his balance after the assault. Ki wipes a trickle of red from his mouth, showing that he has finally found a worthy rival. Katagiri is in shock, noticing that the intruder managed to injure the protagonist with a single blow. Kuroki watches everything with a convinced smile, sure that his elite assassin will win the fight. The young intruder's reaction speed and combat power surpass the limits of an ordinary human. Kay asks the rival directly if he is part of the dangerous group called the Funeral Flowers. Campanula confirms with a sneer and officially introduces himself as the flower of gratitude of his group. The young man puts his hands together and ironically gives thanks for having a fun game at the end of his job. The two fighters continue to stare at each other coldly under the supervision of the very tense security guard. Ki gives a challenging smile and replies that the pleasure of facing him is actually all his. With glowing eyes, the boy warns that now he can eliminate his adversary without needing to hold back. Campanula advances to restart the duel while the arena's announcer watches. Terrified, Katajiri bites his lip with worry, sensing that this fight will be much more violent than the others. Akari and Kuroki continue to watch the spectacle from the box above with very different feelings. Kai mentally admits that he wouldn't want to receive that extremely painful open palm strike. Campanula looks down at him with a sadistic smile, his eyes shining with pure amusement in the middle of the ring. The protagonist analyzes his opponent and concludes that he needs to figure out his fighting style as soon as possible. Campanula ironically comments on the silence of the place while observing the fallen bodies around the two fighters. The assassin warns that if Ki doesn't take the initiative, he will advance himself to start the confrontation. Campanula flies toward Kei, delivering an extremely swift attack with his fists in the arena. Kai's eyes widen as he realizes the incredible speed his enemy possesses in his movements. Campanula continues to attack with full force and tries to land a direct punch on the boy. Kai manages to dodge, just barely by leaning his body back with great agility. The young man wonders what's strange about the unusual movement the enemy is showing. Campanula attacks consecutively from top to bottom, trying to break the young man's strong guard for good. Kai notices that although the blows are fast, their trajectories are easy to predict in combat. He also notes that the air current generated by the fists gives away the exact direction of each attack. The rival's style lacks Lycoris's precision, being just a mix of violence and speed. Campanula is startled to realize that his strongest blow was completely avoided by the boy in the suit. Kai takes advantage of the opening to apply a surgical block directly to the young assassin's arm. The enemy feels a painful shock, and his eyes widen as he notices what the protagonist has done. Campanula moves away, jumping back quickly, while Kei remains firm in his stance. Katajiri celebrates enthusiastically upon seeing that the protagonist successfully hit his dangerous rival. The assassin notes that his radial nerve was hit, leaving his left arm completely paralyzed. He smiles and explains that this technique resembles the gunting of Psylot, used to disable limbs. The protagonist used the pisiform bone of his wrist to deliver a very precise impact. Campanula asks with curiosity if Kei's blow was the feared method of passing. Kai mockingly comments that his rival knows the technique well and ironically asks if the style is now in fashion. This school of Sealet was created to resist invaders, but was eventually banned for being too lethal. Kai explains that the technique is not popular because he heard the last living user passed away 11 years ago. Without wasting time, the assassin goes on the offensive, delivering a violent kick at the young man. The intruder gives a very sadistic smile as he plans his next move in the middle of the fight. Ki tries to counter-attack quickly, but his adversary manages to block the assault with ease. The protagonist's eyes widen in shock as he realizes his opponent is predicting all of his moves. Campanula smiles, stating that the young man is interesting and that he wants to see the limit of his abilities. Ki grits his teeth, very irritated, as he tries to read the enemy's extremely fast movements. The assassin dodges all the punches very agilely, leaving the protagonist quite frustrated. He moves without any real effort, creating several motion trails across the combat arena. The protagonist thinks that this doesn't make sense and wonders how his rival dodges so easily. Normally, fighters read their opponent's movements to predict the direction of the next attack. They calculate the shift in the rival's center of gravity to know where the blow will be delivered in time. Without this reading, it would be impossible to react to exchanges of blows that last only fractions of a second. However, Ki realizes with astonishment that his rival dodges the punches, only after seeing their physical trajectory. This means that the assassin's reaction speed surpasses the limits of any ordinary human. Suddenly, Campanula flips upside down and lands a violent punch on the protagonist's face. Kay lets out a groan of pain as he is hit squarely by the devastating blow from the blue, hooded young man. The impact throws the boy back with extreme violence, raising a large cloud of dust. He slides across the concrete floor, badly hurt after taking the full force of that enemy attack. Katajiri shouts the boy's name in total desperation. Seeing that his young ally has been knocked down, Akari rises from her chair, frightened, unable to believe her protector's defeat. Kuroki extends his hand to stop the young woman from moving, maintaining a very cynical expression in the room. The traitor mockingly comments that this is real violence, and that the bet has already been decided. He smiles, saying that what matters in the underworld is surviving to reap the rewards of the bet. The young woman glares at him with deep contempt and calls him a coward without showing any sign of panic. Akari seriously warns that she will make her rival pay a much higher price than the bet. When the combat is over, she tells the mafioso to get ready as the protagonist shows the first signs of getting up. The Harris and the bodyguard watch in surprise as the young man gets back up after the rival's violent blow. Standing again, Kay adjusts his tie and states that he has already figured out the enemy's biological secret. The boy has a light scratch on his face, but keeps his focused gaze on his opponent in the arena. The entire underground arena waits in absolute silence for the restart of the violent physical clash. Kai reveals with total certainty that his adversary's true specialty lies in the structure of his body. The young man points out that the secret behind such reaction speed is in the young rival's nerves. The assassin celebrates cheerfully, raising his arms and confirming that he really does have something special. He confesses that his nervous system was developed through stem cell transplants in the past. Campanula explains that his axons are thicker, and therefore his nerves are much more resilient. Kay concludes that the reaction speed is due to this modification, and the assassin smiles in agreement. An ordinary human, no matter how much they train, needs about 0.2 of a second to react. Campanula reveals that his reaction time is only 0.002 of a second, the same as a cat's. Thanks to this, the whole world around him seems to move in a slow, paused manner before his eyes. Kay realizes that the power of his palm strike is based on his highly enhanced body proprioception. Katajiri and Akari watch the entire biological explanation in complete silence from their positions. Kuroki focuses his gaze on the ring as the assassin explains that he has all his senses highly sharpened. He can feel every muscle fiber to apply the maximum force flow without any waste. The young assassin points out that a legendary technique like Fa Jin is as simple as breathing for him. The villain looks down on others, saying they are weak for remaining trapped by human limits. The image of ancient warriors appears as Campanula claims their efforts were quite pathetic. Kai agrees with his rival but asks if having this slow vision doesn't interfere with his daily routine. Campanula is confused, not understanding where the protagonist is going with that mysterious question. Kai mockingly asks if watching normal movies doesn't seem like a slow, stuttering flipbook. The assassin gets annoyed and admits that this part of his ability is indeed a bit irritating. Kai declares that if the enemy has no more tricks, it's past time to end this combat. The protagonist states that he will put a definitive end to the rival's whole chariot of abilities. Kai unleashes a terrifying red aura, showing that he will now use his full combat power. Campanula smiles sadistically with his purple aura and says he will watch the grand finale of this battle. Akari and Kuroki continue to watch the intense action with very serious expressions. Kai mentally acknowledges that the young assassin's physical reflexes are completely out of the ordinary. He knows very well that any kind of common frontal attack will be easily blocked by his opponent. The adversary dodges multiple punches, showing the extent of his physical superiority in the ring. With this in mind, the protagonist realizes that there is only one viable path to his victory. He plans to launch a counter-attack at the exact moment of his adversary's own violent assault. Campanula smiles very confidently because he knows exactly what the protagonist plans to do. The villain deduces that Ki became confident after the previous blow and is trying to overcome his super reflexes in the fight. The assassin maliciously reveals that he allowed himself to be hit on purpose, just to deceive the boy. Campanula guarantees that he can react with extreme ease to any of the protagonist's counter-attacks. The assassin dodges Ki's blow and prepares to deliver a fatal attack at close range in the ring. The villain's fist strikes the protagonist's chin with an extremely crushing force. Campanula laughs uncontrollably, claiming that every surprise action was already foreseen in his script. He scoffs, saying that victims always cling to false hopes before their end in battle. A trail of dust and wind spreads across the arena as the mortal combat reaches its climax. Campanula shouts, telling the protagonist to fall, as he charges with everything to deliver the final blow. Kai remains completely still, showing no defensive reaction against the assassin's assault. The assassin challenges him to try and counter his fist. Claiming that this moment will be his end, Ki opens his eyes with total serenity, showing that he does not fear his opponent's physical strength at all. The assassin notices that he hasn't moved and wonders why the boy gave up on counter-attacking. Campanula concludes that at this close range, there's no way for his rival to react in time to escape. He yells that it's all over as he unleashes his full power punch at the young man in the suit. The fist cuts through the air, trying to definitively snuff out the protagonist's life. Kei tilts his head in a bizarre way to meticulously dodge the impact of the punch. Campanula's eyes widen in shock as he realizes his full power blow has missed the target. In truth, Kei's move had already been made, but his rival could only dodge perceptible threats. Campanula is hit and thrown back by the concentrated power of a subtle attack he couldn't see at the instant of that quick collision. The protagonist's movement was very subtle. The tips of Kei's fingers very lightly touched the middle of his opponent's eyebrows. This touch was actually the application of the secret silent technique, known as the poison needle. The blow hits the trigeminal nerve, cutting off the transmission of information from the brain over time. The effect activates the exact moment the victim focuses their nerves in a state of extreme concentration. The technique works like a delayed poison that completely destroys all of the rival's senses. Kai glares at him terrifyingly and mockingly asks what he thought of the ending to his script. The protagonist remembers the instant he lightly touched Campanula's forehead with his fingers. He was thrown back by the opponent's force, but managed to land with total elegance. Suddenly, Campanula tries to stand firm in the arena, but his whole body begins to fail. The assassin spits a lot of red, screaming in pain as he feels all his senses suddenly disappear. Campanula falls face first onto the concrete floor, cracking the ring as he is totally defeated by the boy. The spectators and the traitorous leader himself watch the scene with wide eyes in deep shock. Assassin tries to move but realizes it's impossible and desperately asks what his rival did. Kai just looks at him coldly and calmly replies that he simply touched his opponent. Ki didn't attack directly, but tensed the muscles of both legs and lowered his pelvis. He completely stabilized his spine and locked his upper body with his back muscles. By extending his arms firmly, the protagonist turned his entire body into a solid stake. The moment a weightlifter lifts the weight, he contracts his entire skeletal structure. With that, he becomes a pillar that supports hundreds of pounds. And the boy's logic was exactly the same. The young man turned his body into a stake rooted in the earth and simply remained static there. He blocked Campanula's destructive force, using only the tips of his fingers as a barrier. By the law of action and reaction, The kinetic energy of the blow ricocheted right back at the assassin himself. In other words, it was the equivalent of Campanula throwing himself at full force against a spear stuck in the ground. This is the secret of an ancient combat technique. As borrowing the rival's strength, Kai maintains a completely calm expression as he closely observes the result of his technique. The fall-in assassin asks with great difficulty if the protagonist used his own strength against him. He remembers their earlier conversation and realizes the boy used the debate about nerves. Just as a distraction, Kai confirms that he was just buying time for the paralyzing effect to take full hold. Campanula smiles, praising the boy for managing to ruin his perfect assassination script. The protagonist coldly states that all professional assassins eventually get what's coming to them. He adds that for Campanula, the day to pay for his choices has just arrived. The young villain spits red and thanks his opponent sincerely before losing his strength on the floor. He gives a faint smile, silently commenting that his whole life in this boring and dull world ended up seeming much more interesting thanks to the mortal confrontation he had with the young man in the suit. The light in Campanula's eyes finally fades as he maintains his last smile on his cold face. Ki wishes him to rest in peace, while the traitorous leader mutters angrily, cursing the young man in the suit. Suddenly, a desperate voice shouts Kuroki's name, immediately drawing Kai's attention in the ring. The protagonist quickly turns his head and sees the coward grabbing the young Harris from behind in the arena. Kuroki cocks his weapon and presses it directly to Akari's head with an expression of insane madness. With his red eyes glowing intensely, Kei directs a murderous and dark glare at the traitor.